The HOA built a pipeline straight through my ranch, and they didn't even ask. One morning, bulldozers roared across my field like an army of steel beasts, engines growling, chewing up the ground, flattening everything, including the oak tree I planted in memory of my late wife. My grandson Eli stood on the porch, frozen, clutching his sketchbook as tears filled his eyes. Behind the sheriff stood Mara Denton, president of the Ridgeway Homeowners Association. Clipboard in hand, smirk carved across her face, she said it was for the good of the community. That line burned through me, because what Mara didn't know was that her entire project, her pipeline, her power, her pride, was built on a lie, and that secret was going to make me the man who controlled every drop of water in this valley. Before we dive deeper, welcome to Tomato Tales, where true stories cut deeper than fiction. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe no HOA should ever trample over a man's home, hit that like button right now. You're about to see how far one man will go when his past and his family are on the line. The first sign of trouble wasn't a notice or a knock. It was a flicker of orange through the cottonwoods down by the creek. I was fixing a loose board on the porch when I saw it. Survey markers stabbing into the soil, right where they didn't belong. You learn to read the rhythm of your own land. The way the wind shifts through the grass, the sound of the stream after rain. Bright vests and metal tripods don't belong in that rhythm. I made my way down the hill, boots sinking into the soft earth. 3 men stood there, one with a clipboard, 2 pounding stakes into my ground. "Morning," I called out. "You boys lost?" The one with the clipboard didn't even meet my eye. "Just doing our job, sir. HOA easement extension." I almost laughed. "There's no HOA here. Never has been." He pointed toward the rooftops over the ridge. "Tell it to them." And that's when something shifted inside me. Not fear, not even anger. Something colder. The kind of calm that only shows up right before a storm. They thought they could walk over me. They thought this land was just dirt. But they were about to learn. This dirt fights back. Because next, when Mara Denton showed up at my gate with the sheriff and a stack of papers, I made a decision that would change everything. Don't miss what happens next. Hit subscribe to Tomato Tales right now, because this battle truly begins. 3 days after those surveyors trespassed onto my land, I heard tires crunching on my gravel drive. When I stepped onto the porch, there she was. Mara Denton, head of the Ridgeway HOA, flanked by 2 sheriff's deputies like she was royalty. Clipboard in hand, posture stiff, smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Mr. Rowan," she said, not asked, said, "We're here about the pipeline." The younger deputy looked uneasy. The older one just stared ahead like a statue. Mara, though, she was glowing with control. You could tell she loved this part. She waved a packet of papers. "The community board has approved construction. The easement is legally sound. Work begins next week." I took the papers and flipped through them. Half the words looked like a foreign language, buried in legal jargon. "This is private property," I said. "You've got no easement here." That smile of hers didn't waver. "We found a loophole in the original county filings from the 70s. Our lawyers assure us it's perfectly legal. So, Mr. Rowan, whether you like it or not, this project is happening." Then she turned her back and started toward her car. Like she'd already won. That was her first mistake. I spent the next 3 days calling every lawyer I could find. Most didn't even return my messages. The one who did met me for coffee, looked over the documents, and sighed. "I'm sorry, Luke," he said, sliding the papers back across the table. "They found a buried utility clause. Old dusty law nobody uses anymore. They can push it through if they've got the money. And trust me, the HOA's pockets go deep." He looked me dead in the eye. "They're doing this because they know you can't afford to fight. Hope's a funny thing. You don't realize how tightly you're clinging to it until someone cuts your fingers loose." I left that cafe hollow. The system, the law, even the land I paid for, all of it was being twisted against me. But standing on my porch that night, watching the floodlights of the bulldozers glow on the ridge, something inside me hardened. They could take my tree. They could tear up my soil. But they were about to find out. I still had roots they couldn't dig up. And when the first bulldozer blade touched that oak's shadow, I made a promise I intended to keep, because the moment they broke ground, I started breaking them. Don't blink. Subscribe to Tomato Tales right now so you don't miss how the fight truly begins. Monday morning came like thunder. I didn't need an alarm clock. The bulldozers did that for me. Their engines roared through the valley, shaking the windows, rattling the coffee cup in my hand as I stepped out onto the porch. The green of the pasture shimmered under the rising sun, right before those steel monsters carved through it like it was nothing. My grandson Eli came to stand beside me. He didn't cry. He didn't even speak. He just gripped my hand, small fingers tightening around mine as if he could hold the world together that way. When the lead bulldozer dropped its blade, my heart dropped with it. It wasn't just dirt they were cutting into. It was memories. The tree I'd planted for my late wife, Claire, stood proud on the ridge. We used to sit under it together at sunset, dreaming about a quiet life. I planted that tree the day after her funeral. It was our second chance, our living memory. And then, with one splintering crack, the bulldozer tore it down. The sound wasn't loud, but it felt like thunder inside my chest. Eli turned away, burying his face against my side. All I could do was hold him, watching as the machine rolled right over what was left of her oak, grinding the past into dust. That was the moment everything changed. Grief shifted into something else, something cold, sharp, and patient. They weren't just stealing my land. They were erasing my life. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. Not yet. I watched as they carved a trench through the center of my property, a muddy wound that split the land in two. The foreman barked orders, the crew laughed, and Mara Denton, in her perfect white blouse, stood off to the side, smiling like she'd just signed her name on my grave. I remember whispering to myself, "You've taken enough, Ara. Now it's my turn." That night I sat on the porch long after the engines went quiet. The stars above the ridge burned cold, indifferent. But in that silence I made myself a promise. I wasn't going to fight with rage. I was going to fight with strategy. Because sometimes revenge isn't about fire. It's about waiting for the wind to blow it back toward them. And when I walked into that HOA meeting next week, I made sure Mara Denton never forgot my name. If you think she's about to get away with this, you're in for a shock. Subscribe to Tomato Tales right now because the battle moves from the field to the boardroom. And that's where the real war begins. You can tell a lot about a person by how they run a meeting. And from the minute I stepped into that Ridgeway HOA clubhouse, I knew Mara Denton ran hers like a queen on a throne. The air smelled of chlorine and fake citrus, the kind of freshness you only get when something's rotten underneath. I wasn't a member, but I'd registered as a county guest. The law said I was allowed in, and for once I planned on using it. She sat up front behind a long folding table, tapping her pen against a stack of papers like a judge waiting for the accused. 4 other board members flanked her, none of them daring to look my way. I waited my turn, then stood up and walked to the microphone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "Name's Luke Rowan," I said. "My family's owned the South Ranch for over 20 years. You've cut a pipeline straight through my property without permission. You're violating the county's land use law, and you're about to destroy a natural spring that feeds the Valley Creek." For the first time, Mara actually looked at me. Her eyes were cold, but her lips twitched into that same smug little smirk. "Thank you for your comments, Mr. Rowan," she said sweetly. "We appreciate your passion." She reached into her briefcase, pulled out a document, and nodded to a man in a cheap suit sitting beside her. He brought it to me, a cease and desist order. It legally barred me from stepping near their construction site. "We're well within our rights," he said, voice slick and polished. "You'll still have access to the main water feed, as a courtesy. A courtesy." On my own land, my hand trembled, not with fear but fury. They'd come here not to hear me, but to silence me, and every smug face staring at me that night would live to regret it. When I walked out of that building, the night air hit like ice. But I wasn't alone. A man from the back row caught up to me. "Gray hair, tired eyes. Don't let her get to you," he said quietly. "She's done this to half the town. You're just the first one who stood up." His name was Michael Barrett, and what he told me next changed everything. Because Mara's pipeline project, it wasn't about water. It was about money. And the deeper I dug, the dirtier it got. You don't want to miss what Michael revealed next. Trust me, it's the turning point of this entire story. So make sure you're subscribed to Tomato Tales and get ready, where corruption starts to leak faster than water ever could. Michael Barrett wasn't just some cranky neighbor. He was a man who'd seen Mara Denton's game from the inside. We stood by my truck in the parking lot under the flicker of the streetlight, the evening heavy with dust and truth. "She's been doing this for years," he said quietly, glancing around like even the night might be listening. "You're just the first one who fought back." He told me stories. Fines for trash cans left out too long. Liens placed on homes for flowers planted off list. And then came the kicker. The pipeline was her family business. Mara's brother owned the construction company that got the contract. She wasn't building for the community. She was building for her own wallet. "Follow the money," Michael whispered. "Everything she does starts and ends there." I couldn't sleep that night. I kept seeing her standing beside that bulldozer, clipboard in hand, smiling while she destroyed my land. But now I had something stronger than anger: information. The next morning I went through every document she'd handed me. The survey maps, permits, county filings, all the things I'd barely looked at before. At first it looked like gibberish, but one small detail caught my eye. A tiny symbol on the blueprint that didn't line up with the terrain. Their planned trench took a sharp, unnatural turn right through the rockiest part of my pasture. It made no sense, unless someone wanted it that way. I knew those slopes like the back of my hand. There was no reason to dig there, unless they were hiding something. And that's when it hit me. The map didn't match reality. The route they'd submitted to the county wasn't the route they were building. Someone had falsified the plans. I pulled out my old topographic maps from my engineering days and started tracing the layout. The further I compared, the clearer it became. Mara wasn't just lying. She was stealing. They weren't tapping a shared water line. They were tapping the natural spring system, the one that fed half the valley. If I was right, the whole project wasn't just unethical. It was illegal. I stared out the window at the trench cutting through my field and whispered, "You thought you buried me, Mara, but you just planted the wrong seed, because that seed starts to grow into the one plant she'll never see coming." Hit subscribe to Tomato Tales right now, because next, I uncover the truth that turns this HOA Queen's empire into quicksand. For days I watched that trench snake deeper across my land, a muddy scar cutting through memory and soil. Every time the excavator's arm swung, it felt like claws raking across my chest. But then curiosity replaced anger. Something about the path didn't sit right. Why would they dig through the hardest stretch of shale, instead of following the easy route along the road? One evening, I grabbed my old topo maps, a flashlight, and my boots. If Mara Denton's crew wanted to hide something, they'd picked the wrong rancher to fool. The air was cool and damp as I followed the trench's edge. The clay was slick underfoot, puddles shimmering under the moon. 100 yards past the dig site, I heard it, a faint gurgle. Not from the creek, from beneath the brush beyond the fence line. I pushed through the undergrowth, and there it was, a small pool, perfectly clear, water bubbling up from the earth like liquid glass. Spring, the true heart of the valley's water system. And it wasn't on my property. It was on the old Miller place, the one everyone thought was abandoned. That's when the puzzle clicked. Their blueprints showed the pipeline drawing from my creek, public domain water, as their loophole claimed. But the flow didn't come from my creek. It came from this spring. They'd tapped a private source without permission and built their entire system on a lie. Mara Denton hadn't just trespassed. She'd stolen the valley's lifeline. And soon I realized that lifeline could legally belong to me. I called my old friend George Lang, a retired hydrologist I'd known since my engineering days. He met me at dawn, maps under his arm, curiosity burning behind wire-rimmed glasses. After just a few minutes examining the flow and soil, he gave a low whistle. "Luke," he said, "you found the crime scene. They built a straw to drink your milkshake and stuck it in someone else's glass." We hiked back to my porch, and as the sun crept up over the ridge, a plan started forming. It was risky, borderline crazy, but it could turn the tables. The Miller property was in foreclosure, taxes unpaid for years. If I bought it, I'd own the spring. And if I owned the spring, I'd own their entire pipeline. They thought they'd buried me under paperwork. But I was about to bury them under truth. That plan takes shape, and I put everything I own on the line to win back my land. Don't miss it. Hit subscribe to Tomato Tales right now because the revenge is about to turn real. Once I realized the spring sat on the abandoned Miller property, I knew what I had to do. The county's online auction was in 2 weeks, starting bid barely enough to cover back taxes. It wasn't just land, it was leverage. If I could buy it, I wouldn't need lawyers, loopholes, or begging. I'd own the source. And when you own the source, everyone else drinks on your terms. But I didn't have the money. Not really. I stared at the auction page night after night, the glow of my old computer flickering across the kitchen walls like a ghost of all the choices I'd made. That week, I started selling pieces of my past. The restored tractor Claire and I rebuilt together, gone to a collector 3 towns over. The savings bonds we bought the year we were married, cashed out for pennies on the dream. Even my service savings from the Veterans Fund. I pulled every dollar I could reach. Each sale hurt. It was like watching parts of my life float away one receipt at a time. Eli watched me quietly through it all. He's sharp for his age, too sharp. One night he sat at the kitchen table while I refreshed the auction site for the 100th time. "Grandpa," he asked softly, "are you scared?" I looked at him, at those big, honest eyes that reminded me so much of his mother, and told the truth. "Yeah," I said, "but I'm more scared of what happens if I don't fight back." He nodded, didn't say another word, just placed his sketchbook beside my hand. A drawing of the ranch, the creek, and a new oak tree standing tall on the ridge. That was all the courage I needed. The night of the auction felt like a gunfight. Numbers climbed, bids jumped, time ticked down like dynamite. When the final 10 seconds hit, I took a deep breath, typed in every cent I had left, and clicked submit. The screen flashed once, then again. Sold. I just stared. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the mouse. But there it was, my name printed under winning bidder. I didn't cheer. I didn't shout. I just whispered, "Welcome home, Claire," because now the land, the spring, and the water that fed Mara Denton's precious pipeline belonged to me. And what comes next? Let's just say I was done playing defense. The tables finally turn. When they flip the switch on their shiny new water system, they're about to find out what it's like to run dry. So stay with me and subscribe to Tomato Tales right now because the payback begins next. Owning the Miller property felt less like a win and more like holding a loaded secret. The deed still smelled of fresh ink when George Lang showed up on my porch with a thermos of coffee and a stack of maps. We weren't out for destruction. We just wanted balance restored. to let the water flow the way it always had before greed got in its way. George traced a finger over the topo lines. "See this old side channel?" he said. "Used to run parallel to the creek. Clogged with silt now. We clear that, the spring flows naturally away from their intake. Simple, legal, and devastating. We grabbed shovels, rakes, and an old pickaxe, and by mid-morning we were knee-deep in mud. Every scoop of dirt felt like reclaiming something stolen. The cold spring water shimmered as it found the new path, curling away from the HOA's pipeline like it had been waiting for permission. 2 hours later, the trickle became a steady stream, clear, strong, and beautifully indifferent. Mara Denton's $1 million pipe sat bone dry. We walked back to the porch, filthy and grinning, and poured ourselves coffee while the sun rose higher. Then we waited. It didn't take long. By noon, a white utility truck tore down the Ridgeway main road. Then another. Phones started buzzing across the neighborhood. Lawns sputtered, showers hissed, sprinklers coughed up dust. Their brand new water system, the one Mara promised would revolutionize community living, was choking on its own arrogance. An hour later, Mara's brother's crew was back at my fence line, pacing, pointing, shouting into radios. From my porch, I watched through binoculars as they dug at the trench, confusion spreading faster than panic. And then came the luxury sedan. Mara Denton stepped out, heels sinking in the mud, fury carved into every line of her face. She barked orders. She blamed equipment. She probably blamed the weather, but she never once looked 100 yards upstream. I took a slow sip of coffee and smiled. For the first time in months, the ranch was quiet again, except for the sound of running water that no longer belonged to her. They wanted to own the valley. Instead, they'd built their empire on ground, I now commanded. But this was just the beginning. Because when Mara stormed up my driveway that evening, screaming accusations, she had no idea the papers waiting in my hands would end her reign for good. If you think watching the queen of the HOA lose her crown sounds satisfying, you haven't seen anything yet. Subscribe to Tomato Tales so you don't miss The Queen Falls. By sundown, I could already hear her coming. Gravel exploding beneath tires, the sound of rage on 4 wheels. Mara Denton's silver sedan skidded to a stop at my gate, headlights slicing through the dust. She climbed out like she owned the world, clipboard in one hand, fury in the other. "What did you do?" she screamed, marching toward my porch. "You sabotaged public property. I'll have you arrested before sunrise." I didn't move. I just took another slow sip of coffee. "Evening, Mara. Don't you evening me," she snapped. "Our water's gone dry, our contractors are threatening to sue, and the sheriff's on his way. You've ruined everything." I reached beside the rocker and picked up a plain manila envelope. "Actually," I said, handing it to her, "I just fixed a mistake." She yanked out the papers and started reading. First the deed to the Miller property, stamped and notarized, my name bold at the bottom. Then the water rights certificate dated 1957, attached like the final nail in her coffin. Her eyes moved from line to line, confusion giving way to horror. This can't be real," she stammered. "Oh, it's real," I said, standing. "You built your fancy pipeline on a spring that never belonged to you. And now it belongs to me." For a long second she just stared, all that fake confidence draining out of her like the last trickle from a broken faucet. Then she turned, clutching the papers like a drowning woman grabbing driftwood, and stumbled back toward her car. "Mara," I called after her. She stopped but didn't turn. "You told me this was for the good of the community," I said. "Guess you forgot the community doesn't start at your driveway." She slammed her car door so hard, the echo rolled across the pasture. Dust rose, tires spun, and she was gone. By the time the sheriff arrived, I was sitting exactly where I'd been before, on the porch, coffee still warm, the valley quiet. When he asked what happened, I just smiled. "Property dispute," I said. "But I think it's settled now." For the first time in months, I felt the air shift. The ranch exhaled, but I knew Mara Denton wouldn't vanish that easily. People like her never do. They come back clawing, desperate, dangerous. And when she did, I'd be ready because the night she tried to take it all back, she ended up losing everything. Don't miss the moment karma comes full circle. Subscribe to Tomato Tales right now, and get ready for the fall that shook the valley. It was 3 nights later when I heard the hum. Low, steady, mechanical, like the growl of a beast waiting outside my window. I knew that sound. Generator. I stepped onto the porch, shotgun cradled but low, just in case. Down near the trench, flashlights darted through the dark. 2 figures. One small, one moving with the stiff, angry rhythm I'd come to recognize. Mara Denton. She was back, and she wasn't alone. They'd hauled in a portable pump, thick hoses coiled like snakes trying to reroute the spring water before dawn. She was shouting orders, her voice sharp and panicked. "Start the intake. Move faster." I called out, calm and even. "Careful, Mara, that's not your land anymore." She froze. The man beside her, her brother, the contractor, turned, flashlight cutting across my face. "You can't stop us," she yelled. "You think buying a piece of paper changes the truth? You stole what's ours." I stepped closer, keeping my light steady on the pump. "No, Mara, I just proved what's yours was never yours to take." Then it happened. The generator coughed, sputtered, and a single spark leapt into the dry weeds. The wind caught it before anyone could move. In seconds, flames licked up the brush like they'd been waiting all summer. Her brother scrambled to unhook the hoses. Mara screamed, backing away, waving her clipboard like it could command the fire. "Shut it off!" Shut it off. We all ran, shovels, dirt, whatever we could grab. The fire spread fast, burning the edge of the trench, curling toward the abandoned line. George showed up halfway through the chaos, hauling a water tank on his truck, spraying down the ridge until smoke choked the stars. By dawn, the fire was out. The land was scarred but alive. Mara wasn't. Not in the way she used to be. When the sheriff came, he didn't even knock. He went straight to her car, found the forged blueprints and the fake invoices that linked her to every crooked deal she'd ever signed. Turns out she'd been digging her own grave for months. We just helped her find the shovel. Watching her get led away in handcuffs, her clipboard finally gone, I felt no joy. Just quiet peace. The land would heal. The water would flow. And for the first time in a long time, I could breathe again. But even peace has a price, because you'll see how far the valley's scars go. And the one choice I made that still haunts me to this day. Stay tuned and subscribe to Tomato Tales right now. The story's not over yet. The morning after the fire, the valley felt different. Not broken, just quiet like it was holding its breath. The smell of smoke clung to the air, and every step I took through the pasture made the earth sigh beneath my boots. The oak was gone. The trench was half filled with ash and soot. And where the HOA's precious pipeline once glittered, now lay a twisted line of blackened metal, warped by heat and truth alike. The sheriff came back later that day. He was a good man, tired, honest eyes. He'd seen enough to know right from wrong without needing a badge to tell him. "Mara's facing charges," he said, flipping through his notebook. "Fraud, falsified records, unsafe construction, you name it." I nodded, staring out at the ridge. "And her brother?" "He's turning state's witness," the sheriff said, lowering his voice. "Guess loyalty doesn't last long when the smoke clears." He paused, then added quietly, "You did what the law couldn't, Luke. You exposed her. But you sure you're okay living with it?" I didn't answer right away, because the truth was, I wasn't sure. That night, Eli and I sat on the porch watching fireflies drift through the dark. He rested his head on my shoulder and whispered, "Grandpa, is it over now?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to promise him peace. But when you fight monsters, sometimes you end up keeping a piece of them. So instead, I just said, "It's over for now." He nodded, content, and dozed off against me. I looked out at the hills, black silhouettes against a bruised sky, and thought about Claire. I'd won, yes, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like a weight, because for every acre I'd saved, I'd lost something softer. Time, peace, maybe even forgiveness. George stopped by the next morning. We shared coffee, no words. Sometimes the silence says enough. He handed me a folded newspaper. Front page. Bold letters. HOA president arrested in Ridgeway corruption scandal. My name sat a few paragraphs down. Local rancher exposes illegal water scheme. I smiled faintly. Not pride, just closure. The valley would recover. Water would flow again. And that spring, under the same sky where everything burned, Eli and I planted a new oak tree. Zmilon, fragile, stubborn, just like hope. Because even in ashes, life finds a way to start over. But I didn't know then that the story wasn't finished. Because something unexpected surfaces, and the past I buried with Mara Denton comes knocking once more. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe to Tomato Tales so you're here when the truth resurfaces. For a while, life went quiet. The grass grew back. The mornings were soft again. Eli went back to school. George fixed his truck, and I thought maybe, just maybe, the valley had finally learned how to rest. Then, one gray morning in early fall, I found an envelope nailed to my gatepost. No stamp, no return address. Just one word typed in bold, notice. Inside was a proposal, fresh letterhead, polished font, legal precision that practically smelled like corporate ink. A new development company was applying for community infrastructure rehabilitation. Different name. Same blueprint, same pipeline. Only this time, Mara Denton's name wasn't on it. At the bottom was a new signature, Ethan Cole, acting president, Ridgeway Development Group. I didn't recognize it, but George did. He showed up an hour later, pale as paper. "Ethan Cole," he said, "used to work for Mara's brother. When she fell, he bought up the contracts. This isn't a comeback, it's a takeover." I stared at the papers spread across my kitchen table. They were smart this time, legally airtight, worded so cleanly that on paper it almost looked noble. Almost. But I'd learned how these people operated. They didn't build communities, they built cages. And I wasn't about to let my grandson grow up inside one. That evening I drove out to the ridge where the new markers had appeared, bright pink flags fluttering in the dusk. And as I looked down at the valley below, I realized the fight wasn't over. It had just changed uniforms. I could have called the sheriff, maybe even the news. But some stories, they don't need headlines. They need action. So I called George instead. "We're not going to war," I said. "We're going to outsmart them," he grinned. "You've still got that look in your eye." "Yeah," I said. "Same one I had the day they cut down that oak." This time, though, I wasn't just fighting for my land. I was fighting for everyone who'd ever been told they didn't have a voice. The valley wasn't just soil and water anymore. It was proof. Proof that greed can't root deeper than truth. You'll see how we turned their own laws, their own greed, and their own arrogance into the rope they hung themselves with. You won't believe how far Ethan Cole went to silence me, and how it all backfired in the end. Stay tuned, and subscribe to Tomato Tales right now. The finale isn't just revenge. It's redemption. Ethan Cole thought he was smarter than Mara Denton. He had money, lawyers, and charm. The kind that hides knives behind smiles. But what he didn't have was history. He didn't know this land like I did. He didn't feel it breathing under his boots the way I had since the day I buried Claire's ring beneath that oak tree. So when he tried to resurrect Mara's old dream, I was ready. George and I spent weeks studying their new proposal. Every clause, every footnote, every cleverly disguised line of ownership transfer. And there it was, the same trick, just buried deeper. They'd created a shell company to reroute rights back to Ridgeway Holdings. Different name, same rot. I wasn't going to fight them with shovels or fires this time. I was going to use their favorite weapon, paperwork. George and I drove down to the county office with a folder thicker than a Bible. Inside it were every deed, every tax record, every email Mara Denton ever sent before her arrest. Public documents now, open to anyone who knew where to look. We showed them how the new pipeline overlapped protected wetland zones, how Ethan's survey falsified the same coordinates Mara once faked. The clerk called in the county supervisor. The supervisor called in the state board. And by sunset, the Ridgeway Development Group had just been flagged for fraudulent filing. The same system that once buried me was now digging up the truth for me. A week later, Ethan Cole showed up at the ranch. Slick suit, dark sunglasses, and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Congratulations, Mr. Rowan," he said. "You've made quite a mess," I just smiled back. "No," I said, "I cleaned one up." He left without shaking my hand. And by the next month, his company was finished. The permits revoked. The investors gone. The valley was safe again, but the best part? The county transferred the abandoned pipeline to public trust, under local stewardship, with me as its first caretaker. Every drop that flowed through it now served the people it was stolen from. Eli helped me hang a small wooden sign by the spring. It read, "Rowan Creek, Land Remembers," and sometimes, when the sun dips low and the water glows gold, I swear I can still hear Claire's laughter in the breeze. That's the thing about justice. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just flows quietly, like water finding its way home. So if you've been following this journey from the start, from the bulldozers to the fire, to the last drop of truth, thank you. This has been the Pipeline War, told right here on Tomato Tales. If you felt that ending in your gut, hit subscribe, drop a comment with where you're watching from, and share this story. And because somewhere out there, someone's still fighting for their land, and maybe this story helps them find their voice.